Brilliant. Okay, great. So good afternoon, all. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Emily, the Research and Learning Officer at 4 and 10, and I'm so pleased to be joined by ATD Fourth World UK as they discuss the experience and insights they have from submitting evidence to the UN's Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. So I'm going to leave most of the talking to them, but first a brief reminder of who 4 and 10 is, and then a couple of housekeeping notes. So for those who don't know, 4 and 10 is London's Child Poverty Network. We exist to bring together organizations like ATD across London as we work together to end child poverty. In London, 4 out of every 10 children are growing up in poverty right now. This is a tragedy, and we believe that by working as a network across London, an end to child poverty is possible. So we have hundreds of members responding to the crisis, and if you aren't currently a member, membership is completely free, and it will help us connect organizations so that we can collectively work together on both practical support and policy and campaigning initiatives around child poverty in London. So I'll be emailing you all afterwards. Feel free to reply to that email or use the links in my footer to learn more about who 4 and 10 is and the activities we organize. And now a couple of final notes. We're recording this session, so feel free to keep your cameras off if you prefer, but if you're able and happy to turn them on when asking a question, please feel free to do so. I've turned the closed caption on to help all attendees access the discussion. If you're not speaking, please keep yourself on mute to reduce background noise. If you have any technical problems, please feel free to message me privately or publicly in the chat, and I'll do my best to help. I'll keep an eye on the chat as much as possible for when we come to Q&A towards the end. And please like a question in the chat that someone else puts if that also helps address your query so we can prioritize. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Diana Skelton to take it over from here.
Hi, everyone. First, I want to thank 4 and 10 for inviting us to speak about our advocacy at the United Nations. So I'm from ATD Fourth World. ATD stands for All Together in Dignity. We're a human rights-based anti-poverty organization. Our approach to tackling inequalities and social justice is that we're led by people who struggle in the worst situations of poverty. Today's webinar is going to focus on the changes that we think are needed, particularly with regards to the social care system and how poverty impacts the right to family life. We have a very rich lineup of speakers today. So I'm going to pass over them as quickly as possible, but the general idea is that there's a few different parts to this webinar. The first thing is that Dr. Koldo Kasla from the University of Essex is going to give an overview of the project where we submitted evidence to the United Nations about povertyism. After that overview, our speakers are going to be having conversations mostly in pairs. And the first 2 pairs will be speaking about our Youth Voices project, which submitted evidence to the UN in the name of the End Child Poverty Coalition, where ATD is a member, as is 4 and 10. Then there's going to be a speaker about a process where we collaborated with other groups to gather evidence for the UN. And at that point, my teammate Emma Carrillo Roas, who can maybe wave to us, is going to propose a 5-minute break with an optional Energizer challenge. After the break, there's going to be some more paired conversations about the main evidence that ATD Fourth World submitted to the UN. And at the very end, we hope that we're going to have kept some time for your comments and questions. So I'm now introducing our first speaker, who's the only one who's actually not live. He had to be in Mexico, so he's recorded a video. This is Dr. Koldo Kasla, who's a lecturer in law at the University of Essex and the director of the Human Rights Center Clinic there. He first got to know ATD Fourth World in 2018, and I'm passing the screen over to Caitlin, who is going to share his video.
Islam lecturer
Caitlin, would it be better if I tried from here? Because it might be that there's a few computers in your room and that's some interference. Yeah?
Yes, is the sound?
Hi, my name is Koldo Kasla. I'm a lecturer in law, in international law at the University of Essex and a member of the Human Rights Centre of the same university. I am sorry I cannot be with you today, but I have been asked to say a few things about the work that we have been doing as part of Human Rights Local, a project of the University of Essex, of the Human Rights Centre of the University of Essex, together with ATD Fourth World and others, to document the impact of poverty and child protection on the right to the protection and assistance to the family. Human Rights Local is a project that we launched in 2020 to make human rights locally relevant, so to connect international principles of human rights with the realities of people on the ground. And we have been collaborating with several groups over the years, both in Essex, in the county of Essex, and in other parts of the UK, to try to make human rights more meaningful and to connect these global principles with the realities of people on the ground. Since mid-2022, we have been working with ATD Fourth World to document the impact of child protection services on the rights to the protection of families and the disproportionate impact that it has on families in poverty. The harsh interventions of child protection services, how they disproportionately affect families in poverty, which can incur in discrimination on the basis of social.
So apologies, I have no idea why that failed or why there was an X in the middle of the video. I'm going to give this one more try. There may be just a problem with the way I have the video downloaded.
We're gonna try again. Sorry. Can you tell me when did you stop?
At 1 minute 42 seconds.
Okay. Where's the video? Sorry, guys.
Hi, my name is Koldo Kasla. I'm a lecturer in law, in international law, at the affect families in poverty, which can incur in discrimination on the basis of socioeconomic status. We have been doing this as part of this process led.
Your screen sharing is paused. That's what it says. Wait, resume share. Sorry about
guys.
this. Technology. I'm gonna do this. I think that's a problem that it's okay.
Let's collate with the people with lived experience of poverty. We have had 6 study groups, 8 focus groups, and 10 interviews. In total, involving so far more than 30 people, including 10 social workers, 17 parents, and most of them mothers, 15 of the 17 are mothers, and 6 young adults and young people, 5 of them female. So 28 of these 33 people that we have worked with in focus groups, study groups, and interviews, 28 of the 33 are female. The legal points that we make in our work together with ATD Fourth World is based on the right to the protection and assistance to the family. That is Article 10 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. This is a treaty that the UK has voluntarily signed up to. alongside more than 170 other countries from all over the world. And the UK is legally required to comply with these rights, with Article 10 of the International Covenant. Is from a legal perspective, I'm not going to give you too many details in this short video, but from a legal perspective, the right to the protection and assistance to the family is broader than the rights to private and family life, and many of you will be familiar with, which is in the Human Rights Act and in the European Convention on Human Rights. Article 10 is a social rights to the protection and assistance to the family. So it requires public authorities to provide assistance, not only to respect the enjoyment of private and family life. In the context of this work that we're doing together since mid-2022, we produced our first submission to the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights in January 2023. We're going to have our reports identifying some concerns that we're going to present or to finalize in possibly in June or July. And we will have another submission to the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, a longer one, towards the end of the year, maybe early 2024, whenever the time comes in the process of, in the ongoing process of UN review of how the UK is complying with economic, social and cultural rights. In March, on 8th March, we had the opportunity to present some of the questions that we had for the UK government, to present some of these preliminary questions or concerns in front of the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. I did that together with Patricia from ATD Fourth Wales. So both of us presented the joint submission between Human Rights Local and ATD Fourth Wales. That submission identified 8 questions, and the idea was very, very quickly to try to encourage the UN committee to pick up these issues and to raise these issues in their interaction with the UK government. There were other submissions from other civil society groups, and each one of us identified different concerns. Now, this step was important because it was the opportunity we had to urge the UN committee to identify these questions, so the questions could then be presented to the UK government, and the UK government will be required to provide information on this. While not all the 8 questions that we included in our submissions, not all of them were included in the UN list of issues, so in the questions that the UN has for the UK government, I think it's good that paragraph 27 of the list of issues included several of our concerns in relation to accommodation for young people who are taken away, and also the monitoring and accountability of for-profit organizations. That's paragraph 27 of the list of issues, the questions that from the UN to the UK government. And then indirectly, other concerns that we had are included in paragraph 9 on non-discrimination and the Equality Act 2010, where we raise the issue of povertyism, which is something that ATD has campaigned for a long time on, and discrimination based on socioeconomic status. And also paragraph 22, the issue of the cumulative impact assessment of social security cuts, which is also something that we raised in our submission. So I think that we have an opportunity here to monitor how the UK government responds to these questions included in paragraphs 9, 22 and 27 of the list of issues. And then when the time comes, to provide additional information based on the work that we're doing together. So watch the space, because we will have several more months of collaboration, and there is still a lot of work to do to ensure that the UN contributes, this UN committee contributes to hold UK authorities to account in relation to economic, social and cultural rights. Thank you.
So we're grateful to have that from Coldo to situate us. All our other speakers are live, and we're now going to pass over to our first pair of speakers talking about our Youth Voices contribution. This is Cadence Strayak and Dr. Jill Main. Cadence is 18 years old and lives in Orkney, Scotland. She's a co-founder of Teen Advocacy, and she first started collaborating with ATD Fourth World in 2021. Jill Main lives in Leeds and is a professor of childhood, youth, and social justice and she got to know ATD in 2019. So over to the two of you, and as each of our pairs of speakers comes towards the end of their time, I'm going to hold this up just so that we can try to save time for all the speakers.
Hello, everyone. I am Cadence. I'm going to talk a bit about my experience as a peer researcher to start with. So what I mean by I'm a peer researcher is that I'm a young person with lived experience. And in our research, we have gone and spoken to young people with lived experience as well. I'm really glad that I've gotten to be part of the Youth Voices project, because I think it's been a wonderful opportunity for myself, but I think it has been very valuable to the research as well. Many young people that go through the child protection system who interact with social services have their trust broken. And whether this means that they just don't trust social workers or professionals in general, or even just general adults, it'll make it that much more difficult when you're trying to do research with them, because they won't trust you, they don't know who you are. But they are more likely to trust somebody they know has experienced similar life events, somebody who might get it, somebody who is less likely to misunderstand or to try and intervene in a way that could be harmful. And so I think it's been very valuable that I've gotten to be on this project, and I'm really glad. I didn't realize when I started out that this is so uncommon to have peer researchers, which I don't entirely understand, but I would think it'd be wonderful if there were more peer researchers to be able to contribute in the way that I've been able to. I think young people have a lot to give to research projects, but often we don't have the same experience as older people. And so I think it'd be wonderful there to be more opportunities. So it's been wonderful to be a part of this project and speak to young people. And what I've noticed with speaking to young people and doing this research is there's often a power dynamic where young people are the people spoken down to and aren't the ones leading projects as much. Young people are very used to it being adults and professionals. And so I'd like to ask Jill about what her reflections are on power relationships and research.
Thanks, Cadence. And yeah, I also want to say it's been just a huge privilege to be part of this project. I'm actually no longer a professor at the University of Leeds. I'm currently just kind of finding my next thing. But it kind of links with this because, as Cadence is saying, like, young people are so often excluded or in a tokenistic way or marginalized in the way we do social research. And I think a lot of that is kind of built into the ways that universities think about questions like research ethics, where, you know, I think kind of foreshadowing some things Cadence and I are going to mention in a bit as well, there's so much focus on protection that we forget that young people are people with expertise, and sometimes we just need to shut up and sit back and listen and not take over that space, even if we're doing so for what we think are good reasons. I think also in terms of what Cadence was saying about power dynamics, something that was really apparent to me is the way we kind of pigeonhole people in research. So I came into this project, I met Diana as an academic, as a professor, with all of the kind of baggage that that terminology brings in terms of kind of being an expert or whatever in one actually very limited kind of domain of life. And Cadence, you and Aurelia and Tegan and all of the other young people who took part have a vast amount of expertise. And I think, as you were saying, you have different experiences. That doesn't mean that they're lesser or less important. But yeah, this kind of thinking where we've got young people and professionals and academics, it doesn't account at all for the messy complexity of our lives. So yes, I'm an academic. I also grew up in poverty and experienced social work interventions myself growing up. And so kind of finding how we negotiate those boundaries around, so who am I in this project? And I bring my whole self to this. And how does this fit in with making sure that we're finding out what we need to find out and everybody's kept safe and so on? And I think an overly kind of procedural approach to ethics and to how we do participation in research just doesn't allow for us to really think about that complexity. So it's been fascinating for me to be part of it for that reason, and a real privilege. And just a very quick shout out to our next steps, which are going to involve designing a survey. Now, again, kind of academic surveys and official kind of surveys tend to draw a lot on questions that have been used previously. There's good reasons for that in terms of things like statistical validity. But we lose real world validity when we do that, because the vast majority of questions used in surveys like that have been designed by posh white men. And so we actually need to ask people, before we decide what we're going to ask in a survey, we need to figure out what question do we want answering, and then talk to the people with expertise in that issue through experience about what they think we should be asking. And then again, just engage with the messiness about, well, how do we design new survey questions, or can we find any previous survey questions? And if not, how do we design new survey questions that actually tick that box, that fulfill that need? And it is more difficult, but I think it's really important that we think of participation and of research like this as very much something that can produce numbers as well as words, and that actually produces much more powerful information. And going back to the point of identity, though, I think Cadence, did you have, there was some points about identity, weren't there, that came up, and I wondered if you wanted to kind of say a bit about that.
Yes, I would. When we were doing the research, when we were speaking to young people or people in general who had lived experience, a theme that came up, even if it wasn't always said in these words, was identity. Going through the care system affects your identities. If you have, well, I'm a big sister and I have a bunch of younger siblings. If I went into the care system and never saw them again, I don't know who I would be, because I am a big sister, and that is an important part of how I define myself. Without that, I don't really know who I am. And that came up a lot when we were speaking to people, because there are people who go into the care system and they never meet their siblings again, or they don't grow up with their siblings, even if they do meet with them again. Or one person was telling us about how they were taken into the care system, and then when they were aging out of it, their social worker dumped a bunch of information that they had no recollection or knowledge of about who they were beforehand. And they told us they had to reassess, who are they? They didn't know all this information that affects who they are. And that's an important aspect of the care system that is often overlooked. Sometimes we get really caught up in protecting children from harm that we forget to protect their identity and who they are, and making sure they can keep the knowledge and connections with their communities and families that are so vital and important to them. I think, Jill, I wanted to ask, do you feel that social services and the care system manages to keep in mind children's rights as a whole? Because I certainly feel that identity is sometimes left behind. So I wanted to hear your views on that.
That's a really good question. Thanks, Cadence. And yeah, absolutely agree with everything you said about identity there. And I think, no, I think there's so much emphasis put on what's actually a very limited conceptualization of protection. It's protection in the most risk-averse kind of form, but even within that, only looking at risk to children from parents. We know that children who enter the care system are at risk within the care system. That risk doesn't tend to be balanced between what are the risks of staying in the family, what are the risks of entering the care system. A lot of the young people we spoke to had horrendous experiences within the care system, which were far, far worse than what they would have experienced with their family. And the lack of support as well to kind of help the family. So in terms of one of the kind of ways that people talk about children's rights in relation to this balance between protection, provision, and participation. And there's none of that provision. There's none of that provision to families who are living in poverty, who are living under extreme stress, to enable them to do what they want to do anyway. And in terms of children's participation rights, their right to have a say is far too often overlooked or done very, very tokenistically. I think the wording of children's rights is tricky here because we're meant to listen to children and pay, I think, give their views due weight in accordance with age and maturity. Now, how do we define due weight? I think, we have to remember children are people. They have their own opinions and they're also interdependent with families. They're not just dependent on their families. They contribute to their family. They're very much an active participant in that. And I think all of those kinds of rights are overlooked as well. So I think that's a really important imbalance there. And I don't know if you want to kind of finish off with any reflections on that, Kate. So I don't mean to put you on the spot there, but yeah, I just kind of wanted to give you the last word.
Thank you, Jill. I think I agree with everything you've said. It's often the idea of keeping children safe is so highly important, and I completely understand where they're coming from. Of course, we all want children to be safe, but we need our right to family, we need our right to participation, and we need our right to identity, and that needs to be considered as well as protection. And I believe that children's rights were intended for all of them to be weighted equal to each other. You can't have one without the other. Thank you.
Thanks to both of you, Cadence and Jill. I think you've gotten us off to a very strong start. We're going to move on now to another pair of speakers, Aurelia Dryak and Lyle Barker. Aurelia is 17 years old and lives in Orkney, Scotland. She is a co-founder of Teen Advocacy. And she first started collaborating with ATD in 2021. Lyle is a research officer at Human Rights Local and at the Human Rights Center and School of Law at the University of Essex. He first got involved with ATD in early 2022, just over a year ago, which I find surprising because it's been a really full year. So over to Aurelia and Lyle.
Thank you, Diana. What I'm going to speak about today is peer research, what it is, why it's valuable, why it matters how our research is done, why poverty doesn't just mean not having enough money, and how it makes people vulnerable.
Right. So I think I'll raise some points in relation to povertyism under international human rights law, which were points we included in both the submissions for ATD and the Youth Voices, and then talk a little bit how the reality of the child protection system is in the UK with a specific focus on England, and also mention about the valuable nature of this peer-led process that the Youth Voices project had, and why we really need to encourage peer-led research in that regard. So I think, Aurelia, I think you maybe had some points that were related to what you just mentioned, if you want to maybe present them.
Yeah, thank you. In this project, peer research is research by lived experience young people with lived experience young people. This approach allowed us to conduct our research in perhaps a more humane way. Due to how often we are let down by professionals, we often find it difficult to trust professionals. They have so much power over us, it feels as if one word out of place and they'll be able to ruin your life, because they can. And there would be nothing I or another young person could do to stop them. Their power comes from their position and their knowledge that is rarely shared with us. We aren't told why professionals make decisions, we're just told that they make them. With so much uncertainty, removing them as researchers, instead giving them someone they can see as on their team, that wants to support them and can empathize with what they've experienced, creates a safer and less anxiety-provoking environment. Because it is difficult for our participants. Part of their lives, often the very worst part, is not only incredibly personal, but an emotional scar, and understanding helps us make sure they're comfortable, and for them to know that we're not just trying to use them for their story. They're not just data to us. Poverty puts children and families in vulnerable positions. They don't have the same resources or safety net. Our research has shown that the care system uses these vulnerabilities against families and exploits their disadvantages fighting back. Many are accused of neglect. Instead of supporting these families, they are frequently punished for their situations, which only spirals things out of control. It's vital we recognise that money does not define a good parent, and money does not define a safe and happy child.
Thanks very much, Aurelia. I think very important points. Picking up on the point of povertyism, in relation to the submissions and their research, we had a focus, as my colleague, Dr. Calder Kassler, said at the beginning of this webinar. We had a focus on the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, but also some other relevant pieces of international human rights law. In that regard, we took and ATD has taken the expression of povertyism, which was coined by Olivier de Schutter, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, who refers to povertyism as the negative stereotyping against people in poverty. And he encourages all states to ensure that anti-discrimination frameworks within the states effectively prohibit and discriminate effectively prohibit direct and indirect discrimination on the grounds of socioeconomic disadvantage. So that's really where we take our basis for what we understand povertyism to mean. And in that regard, under the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, Article 2.2 classifies, provides a description of discrimination, and the committee which governs this international treaty has said that socioeconomic status or povertyism or poverty is a human rights violation that many families have experienced in the child protection system within our country. So in light of the right to private and family life, as my colleague Dr. Calder Kassler mentioned earlier, under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which is perhaps a bit more familiar than the right to the protection and assistance of family under Article 10 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. In regard to the Article 8 under the European Convention, the European Court of Human Rights has said that poverty must not be conflated with neglect, and it can never be the sole ground for separating children from their families. And so we can read this in our understanding of Article 10 under the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights as a related right under Article 8 of the European Convention. The European Committee of Social Rights, another international body which is has a treaty of the European Social Charter, has also said that financial conditions or material circumstances are not themselves sufficient reasons to interfere with the right to family life. Yet another piece of international law that we can use to justify any separation or discrimination on the grounds of poverty or povertyism within the child protection system. And in specific relation to the UK, Section 17.8 of the Children Act also says that before giving any assistance or imposing any conditions, a local authority or council should have regard to the means of the child concerned. And so one of the main statistics that we pulled from our research was that between 2015 and 2020 across England, after controlling employment rates, local authorities that saw a greater rise in child poverty had greater increases in the rate of children entering into care. The same local authorities also had a greater increase in rates of children becoming subject to a child protection plan and beginning an episode of need, which is quite, an astonishing statistic to say the least. And obviously, this is where our focus of our research comes in. Aurelia, I don't know if you wanted to perhaps maybe expand on some of the points you mentioned at the start on povertyism and why this project is so important in the way it was peer-led.
Thank you. Yes. Our lived experience is an invaluable part of our research process and design because we're able to understand the feelings and experiences of our peers, as well as allowing us to better make them comfortable and appreciate the fears and trauma they've been through in ways academics will find challenging because we've lived it. We stand beside them instead of looming over them or looking down on them. Young people with lived experience of the care system led this project and brought their own experience to the project to ensure a rights-based approach was taken in the facilitation of the research.
Yeah, and I think I'll circle around back to the importance of this peer-led process and the involvement of people with lived experience, but I just wanted to touch upon a couple of points that we found from our research, included in our submissions to the United Nations. So the focus of our research was primarily based in England, but also a lot of these points do apply UK-wide. But a main point that we found was that the English child protection system, through its policies and practice, really fails to acknowledge the burden placed on families living in poverty, blaming individuals instead of recognizing the wider context and in the possible position they've been put in due to policies of austerity and public's authorities and the government's failure to adequately address the inequality caused by the economic fallout by the COVID-19 pandemic and cost of living crisis. This is in direct contradiction to an obligation under Article 2.1 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, which says the UK government must use its maximal available resources to stop people suffering a lack of enjoyment of their economic, social, cultural rights, which includes Article 10, the right to the protection and assistance of the family. Our research also found that there was a lack or there was an inadequate distribution of funds towards local authorities in order to provide adequate services to help families in poverty that suffer povertyism in the child protection system. And this is also a violation of that same right under international law. Additionally, we found that there is currently a transparency scheme for journalists and bloggers in family courts. This is in place in Cardiff and Leeds and Carlisle. And this really helps povertyism become, any issue of povertyism within that court process become transparent through the transparency of bloggers and journalists and their reporting. So we recommend that this is implemented throughout the UK and made a permanent feature on the policy of the UK government in order to try and prevent povertyism. And thinking about preventing povertyism as well, we also talked about commencing the socio-economic duty under Section 1 of the Equality Act, which would inquire or ensure that public authorities and local authorities had due regards to discrimination in regards to povertyism when enacting any of their policies or practice. And in that regard as well, we also recommended that povertyism or socioeconomic status, should I say, be a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. And we also recommended that parent-to-parent advocacy should be explored by local authorities throughout the UK as a means to really working with families in poverty to try and better understand their position and understand what may correlate or constitute as povertyism in the child protection system, and really help local authorities to better deal with that and understand where families are coming from.
I'm really grateful to both of you. I think that was fantastic. I'm putting a tiny note in the chat about the word povertyism with a little bit of additional information. And I'm introducing our very last speaker before the break, who is going to be Angela Babb. Angela has been part of ATD for 23 years now. And what she's going to talk about is a network called GRIP, the Growing Rights Instead of Poverty Partnership, because through GRIP, Angela has taken part in an action learning process along with 3 other grassroots organizations as a way to support people with lived experience of poverty to gather evidence for the United Nations. So over to you, Angela.
Okay. When you're living in poverty, everyday life is so hard. It's a challenge to also be able to work on a project like this one. We're showing the United Nations how our rights are violated. So ATD is one of our grassroots groups that has had support from Just Fair and Amnesty International to do this work. 2 of the other groups were started by people who are refugees and seeking asylum in the UK. They face racism, which has been going on for such a long time now. Growing up, I never got to play with any white children. One day, I'd just like to be able to walk to the end of the street without anyone making a racist comment. I don't want my grandchildren to grow up with people being so hateful to each other. We told the United Nations that every day we see discrimination on the basis of race, color, poverty, and disability. Displaced people often seek shelter in the UK because of the long impact of colonial policies, but they are not allowed to work or have any adequate standard of living. We believe that the current system in the UK actually works against people. Most displaced people in the UK are banned from working and forced to live in poverty. Instead of supporting themselves, they are forced to waste their skills and talents. Migrants and people with no resource to public funds should be allowed the right to work, and the UK government should help people who do not find work, including with education and training. Some of the displaced people who collaborated with us to talk to the United Nations live in Outer London, borough of Brent, where my own daughter lives. It's the most diverse borough in England, with 65% of its population from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds. In the first wave of COVID, our friends in Brent suffered from very high mortality rates. Their community is mourning, and they really need actual appropriate mental health care and support services, but the right support isn't there. When any services exist, there are European-centric services and available only in English. It's a huge barrier to displaced people who do not speak English. One of our friends in Brent said, "What is the point of seeking support for my well-being? Nothing changes. I'm still living in this shithole. They don't care about us. Do you know I have asked for help 10 times, but they keep telling me to refer myself to where? The system doesn't meet my cultural needs. I'm in so deep, I can't even think straight anymore. I hope by all of us going together to the United Nations, we can get them to convince the UK government that things have to change for everyone who is dealing with poverty, racism, and displacement."
Thank you very much, Angela. I am now passing over to Eva.
Hi, everyone. Wait, sorry, again. God. Sorry, just dealing with two computers. So now we're gonna give 5 minutes of a break. So if you just wanna go put your Zoom on mute and video off and go for a cup of coffee or whatever you want. But alternatively, I have a bit of a game to play for 5 minutes if anyone wants to. I'm just gonna do it. I can't really see everyone here, so I'm just gonna do it. And if people want to do it, just do it. If not, just go to grab a coffee or whatever. So the game is to make you move and not sit down on a desk and watch an hour and a half of us speaking in Zoom. I'm gonna ask you to stand up and go and find this 6 different objects in your house or wherever you are, and then just bring it to the Zoom and show it to me in a video. So actually, Rachel, if you could unpin me so I can see everyone, if that's okay, because I can't really see. Thank you. Yeah, so that is the game. So if you could grab sunglasses, a mug, a pen, a hat, a toilet paper, and a plant, and a photo of yourself. So yeah, we'll type it down in the chat. I'll give you 2 minutes to grab all those things. So you need to be quick, and then just bring it here and just show it to me. So I'm gonna write it down. Sunglasses, mug, pen, to you in 2 minutes. And maybe should we put music or something? Let me find music.
And I definitely, I lose at your game. All I got was a pen. But thank you for organizing that Energizer break. So welcome back to everybody. We're now going to shift to hear about the main contribution that ATD Fourth World submitted to the UN. It was prepared in a whole series of study group sessions about poverty, social work, and the right to family life. And the study groups have been, there's a preparation committee that's been planning them since last year. It's composed of 3 parents with lived experience of poverty and 3 social workers. So the first pair who are going to speak to us are Talia Dryak and Simon Hayworth. Talia is a parent advocate and the founder of Scots Mum's Guide to Safeguarding and Child Protection and the administrator of the International Parent Advocacy Network. She's been part of ATD Fourth World since 2020. Simon is a social worker and a lecturer at the University of Birmingham in the Department of Social Work and Social Care, and he joined ATD's board of directors in 2022. So over to you both.
Hi Talia, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Simon. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. So okay, everyone. So we're going to have a quick chat. Talia and I know each other quite well, so I'm feeling quite nervous now because everyone else's Talia was obviously quite choreographed. Whereas we said we just freestyle it, so it will either work really well and be natural, or it won't. So Talia, we were going to speak first about the impact of our risk-averse child protection systems for families. Did you want to add a few ideas to start with?
Sure. First, I'll just say if the overhead speaker in an airport comes on, I really apologize. I'm in an airport right now, but I'm here. I'm present. I would just like to highlight from our earlier speakers. One of the things that really comes across of our risk-averse child protection system is that we could go on about trauma, we could go on about fear, we could go on about the pain, we could go on about every aspect. But what really hits home is how, in our bid to help, we are catastrophically breaching people's human rights. And that, we have laws in place. I'm going to channel a colleague, that a wonderfully brilliant woman, Francesca, who always says, we have the rules, why don't we use them? We just need to go back to our ethics. And our child protection system is currently not functioning in an ethical way, and it's not upholding the human rights for which social workers are very much, that's their job, to support people, to help people, and to fight for justice and human rights.
And I wondered, Talia, if we could talk a little bit around how our systems do or don't include what I'd call social harms such as poverty. We know from the research that children living in the most deprived areas are 13 times more likely to be subject to a child protection plan and 11 times more likely to be removed from their parents' care. My worry as an academic, and I remain a qualified social worker, Talia, is that our systems have become so removed from everyday life and those material disadvantages that people live within that they're no longer able to challenge those, which when I became a social worker many years ago, Talia, was sort of what we started set out to do. So I just wanted your views on that. Do we challenge social harm such as poverty, or are our systems making those worse?
I think it's very rare that those social harms are challenged, and I think we have a system that has very few safety valves. Every system where there's a top-down approach, where government is intervening, I feel needs to have built-in safety valves. And our system, in no small part because of poverty, because of cost of living, because of David Cameron's great, we're all in it together austerity measures. We have such crippling cuts to legal aid. Good luck finding a legal aid lawyer in many cases. And then access to justice is based on whether or not you have a property to sell, whether or not you have a great uncle who left you money. That's pretty bad lotto, isn't it, for human rights and justice? And so, unfortunately, yeah, I think our safety valves, even those that we have, are not currently functioning in no small part due to poverty.
Thanks, Talia. And I think what I wanted to add to that is, and I know Tammy will clap me for this. She doesn't often clap me, Tammy. Is that we got a system now, Tammy? Do sort of chip in if you want to, where poverty is all about the individual, and poverty, and indeed racism and sexism and parenting within assessments and the system, that they're, in posh words, disaggregated, so that they're not sort of viewed as being somehow together, which I think is really important. And I think as a researcher, Talia, what always sticks in my mind is that our government, God bless their souls, and one of them's currently got a report, hasn't he, for being bullying. We'll see if he resigns, Dominic Raab, and we'll see. But our government doesn't even collect data on the socioeconomic status of families coming into contact with social work. Talia, the other thing I wanted to just touch on, and Jill sort of mentioned it earlier. Fortunately, you didn't sort of steal my thunder too much, Jill, which is very kind of you. But I did something at a conference a little while ago now, and it was about the sort of inherent emotional harm in our system. So maybe moving from poverty to the sort of individual. And there was a really amazing quote from a bit of research by Caroline a number of years ago. And in her research, she said, "It is impossible to describe and capture the extent of the emotional devastation that is involved in permanent removal of your children." I just wanted you to speak to that for a minute.
I'm minded that there was a brilliant quote, which I'm going to bodge terribly here, but that privilege isn't what you have. It's about the lack of barriers that you had to overcome in order to get what you have. And that is an enormous perspective that is lost when we other people. And I think we have this great challenge where in our scrutinizing approaches, in our, we don't have support, we have investigation. We are, and yet we fail to take into account all the hurdles people are facing to get where they are. Instead of asking, why isn't somebody having a good working washing machine, having enough bedrooms in their house, isn't able to afford a fancy birthday party, or perhaps why are they stressed and lashing out even verbally? Maybe we should be looking at what are their barriers, why are they struggling, rather than saying, well, I have this, surely it wasn't that hard. Sorry, did I actually answer anything?
You did, and you've moved us on seamlessly. I don't know how you do it from airports and cars, but you do every time we speak. You moved us on seamlessly. You and I were going to talk, weren't we? I think a bit more hopefully about what a system that was fair and humane might look like. And I guess for a start for 10 is I'm obsessed at the moment, Talia, in my research and life, I suppose, about how families' difficulties are really social in nature. It involves the family, it involves the community, it involves a sort of unequal society. And yet our systems really struggle with that social nature. So I wondered if you could just give some of your ideas on how our systems could be a bit more fair and humane for families and their children.
I think we need to widen the garden and narrow the front door. I think we need community, we need people, we need advocacy, we need friends, we need support, we need opportunities, but we need to not be cattle corralled into court, into, penal notices, into all these, very disparaging, very disheartening, very traumatic, very increasing your vulnerability systems. We need to bring the support back to the community level. I mean, of course, I would say that as a child and family advocate, I feel very strongly we should be supporting people where they are, not bringing them into where the system says it's easy for them to be processed.
Lovely, Talia. And I think sort of adding to that, or if it's adding to it, it's about, isn't it, around not just families reconnecting with communities, but professional systems reconnecting with communities. That was the whole idea in the first place. And I suppose the other side to that, isn't it, is if we have more community solutions, maybe we can start to hold the state a bit more to its responsibilities as well. And I know in PFAN, Talia, we've spoken a lot, and Andy Bilson, I don't know if he's on the call today, around shifting the power really from our really inept and cruel government and associated public services to parents, children and communities. I guess we need to speak, Talia, don't we, seeing as we're sort of whatever founders of PFAN, around the potential benefits of parent advocacy towards that move as well. And I'll quieten down now because you are a parent advocate by extraordinaire.
I'll be mindful, Diana, to keep it short. I absolutely agree. It's organizations like ATD, like 4 and 10, like the End Child Poverty Coalition, like PFAN, who bring people together and build communities. Strong relationships, strong communities make for strong individuals, don't they? Because ultimately we need each other. We're nothing in isolation. And yeah, absolutely.
Is our time up, Diana, you're going to say?
Yes, I think that's spot on, both of you. Thank you. And we could listen to all of you all day, but we have 2 more pairs of speakers. So the next pair is Tammy Mays and Dr. Yuval Sar Hyman. Tammy has been a member of ATD for 22 years now and an activist for 13 of those years. She's also the co-chair of PFAN, which is the Parent, Families and Allies Network. Yuval works in the Spitzer Department of Social Work at Ben Gurion University of the Negev in Israel. And he first started working with ATD in 2020 when he came to Royal Holloway University of London as a senior research fellow. Over to you 2.
Thank you, Diana. Hi, Yuval.
Yay. So a bit like Simon said, we thought we worked for 2 years, more than 2 years already together. So we thought we'll freestyle as well. We hope we'll do it as well as Talia and Simon did it. They gave us a high standard. I'll just say before we open it up, Tammy, that it was a real privilege to be part of the study groups. Unfortunately, I'm now away far from London, but we talked about communities just now, and I think being in these study groups was also being part of a community and knowing, and everything that's going on here is part of a community, and the knowledge that comes out of working together and thinking together, it's amazing. So Tammy and I thought we'll speak about a couple of things that came up in the study groups. And Tammy, we talked about a lot of what came up in the study groups was that people in poverty families are much more vulnerable to child protection intervention and to being seen as being at risk. So maybe you want to give us some picture of that and how you see it.
The problem is there's so many dimensions of it. So many dimensions. And on this subject, I could talk for hours and hours and hours on it. As you know, I have done it many times.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much. I was reading an article just the other day on how more people, and they've got the statistics, and I can't remember the statistics off my head, and I'd have to find the article. But they're getting more people getting investigated through social services because they live in poverty. And the statistics of it was really, really concerning. And even though we knew it was happening, even though it's been happening for years, and loads of families like ours of, you know, we were accused of not budgeting because we'd paid for a holiday but took a year to pay for this holiday. We went on a holiday with no money, and we spent most of it in a caravan or down the beach. And then we came back, and the social worker, because our washing machine had broke, had turned around and said that we weren't budgeting and that we were neglecting our children because we went to a food bank. You know, and this is what happens with families in poverty. They get dehumanized all the time, no matter how much they're doing and how much they're going without to feed their children, to clothe their children, to put shoes on. That, you know, parents will walk around with holes in their shoes so that their children have it. But according to the system and social workers, and even education and hospitals, that's neglecting their children. How? And that would be my question. And you being a researcher, maybe you can shed light on that one, because I still can't get my head around it.
Yeah, so thanks. It's a really important thing, and I think something that came up, and we know it from the research as well, that a lot of times poverty and the ramifications of poverty, what people need to deal with, is translated to say something about people's parenting. Even though it's a social problem and it's a resource problem, it becomes individualized as if it's the parents who are doing something wrong. And that came up very, very strongly, I think, and even in your story now. And the other thing is how social workers perceive, like you said, dehumanized, and how the othering processes that Talia and Simon talked about, the same thing can happen in another family, in another social class. It would be interpreted differently a lot of times. More thoughts about that, Tammy?
Wow, I don't know, but that'd be that's one of our
No,
most.
maybe I can give you a quote that you talk
podcasts.
about a lot, and we even, it was one of the titles of the days we did, that poverty is not neglect. I know you say that a lot. Maybe you want to say something about that, and then we'll talk about social work practice a bit.
Yeah, no, I can talk on that one. That's not a problem. I was trying to think, and the only one I could think of where you were looking at another family where they were rich or where they were middle class or something in poverty, the first that came to mind was the McCanns, and I weren't going to go into that one. But no,
The what?
poverty
I'm
is
sorry?
neglect. You know, the McCanns who left their children while they went to have food, and then they still got to keep their children. We won't go into that one. But poverty isn't neglect. You know, I gave an example not long ago about the food bank, and this is an example that is very much so. Now, if you're a parent and you've got no food in and you do nothing about it, that's neglect. But when you actually go to a food bank, that's not neglect. You know, that's doing what you need to do to make sure that your children have food. So poverty isn't neglect. You know, people see it as neglect, and even now there's still people that disagree with the statement that poverty isn't neglect. And I wouldn't say that I've had arguments with people, but I've had heated discussions over it. You know, but that's up to them. That's their perception. But what we need to do is actually look at it logically. If you're doing something that is harming your child and not doing anything about it, so like going without food, going with shoes when you could spend that money on the shoes, or, you know, and going out and getting a haircut instead of buying your child shoes, that's neglect. That's purposely making your children not have the means that they need. And I'm just going to quickly read a poem that's called We Are People Too. And I think this sums up exactly what you were talking about, but I think it also brings us on to the next subject as well. We are invisible. We do not
I'll
matter.
just say that it's a poem you wrote, Tammy, just to give you the credit.
Yeah, it is a poem that I wrote when I was having one of my off days. Don't get many, but I do. It's called We Are People Too. We are invisible. We do not matter. We do not count. We are a number. We are the forgotten ones. How, you may ask. We wake in the morning. We dread the day ahead. Will we have enough to make it through the day? We have to budget every little thing down to a loaf of bread. Even then, we do not have enough. People say, well, if you have no money, why do you have internet, have a phone, have a TV? Why should we not? We are people too. Life is very digitalized. If you don't have technology, you cannot apply for benefits. You cannot apply for jobs. You cannot talk to friends. Why should we not be like everyone else? We are people too. We use food banks and people use that against us. Why, I do not know. We are seen as unfit parents. We are all put in the same box. We can't afford treats. Our electric is always on emergency. We live on £56 a week, not even minimum wage. But that's okay. We don't matter. We're just another number. But we are people too. Why should we not have the basic things? Why don't we matter? We are people too. We are not layabouts. We are people with feelings. We want to do stuff and have jobs. Unfortunately, circumstances prevent that. We did not ask to live in poverty. We did not ask to be ill. We did not ask to lose our jobs. We did not ask to have children with special needs. But we do the best we can, but that's not good enough. We have to fight a system just to get a little money. Because to everyone else, we're just a number. But we're so much more than that. We are human beings with rights. We are people too. We are kind and caring. We would give our last pound just so someone else didn't go without. We are people too. We are human beings. We are worthy to have enough to live on. So why do we struggle daily? Another day is gone. It's time to go to bed. But it's cold, so we can't sleep. We lay awake and think over and over, what can we do? What can we give up next? Why? We don't matter. Why we forgotten? We are people too. So when you go to bed at night, think of those who didn't eat that day. Think of those that even when they buy food, it's the basics. There's no treats. There's nothing that people take for granted. Those that are going to bed cold on a cold winter's night, because we do matter. We are people too. Sorry.
Wow, Tammy. So yeah, it's just brilliant. You know, sometimes you don't need words, and sometimes it feels like anything I would say will just take down and won't add too much. So we'll let Tammy cool down. I'll just say shortly maybe that I think that so many things in here, Tammy, that we talked about in other words, and I think Simon and Talia talked about in your poem. And at the end of the day, it's about how we need to get closer if we link it to social work. And only if you're close and you have a relationship, and maybe that's the key message we have from the groups as well. You can learn about everything Tammy told us. I mean, if we can just go around social workers and let you read this poem, I think that would be a huge change.
Thanks very much to both of you. I think you've brought us so much in terms of content, really meaningful things that both of you said, and then all of the power and emotion of your poem, Tammy. Really, really grateful for it. Last, but by no means least, we have one more pair, which is Amanda Button and Professor Anna Gupta. Amanda first met ATD in October 2007, and just 10 days later, she was already volunteering with ATD. She's now part of the support group for the national coordination team of ATD. And since 2019, she's been part of dialogue that we've been having together with Amnesty International, Just Fair, and a lot of other groups that helped us to prepare these contributions to give evidence to the United Nations. Anna is a professor of social work at Royal Holloway University of London. She's been involved with ATD since about 2001 and joined our board of directors in 2015. Over to you both.
Thank you. Thank you, Tammy, as well. Thank you. That was really, really powerful. Just wanted to acknowledge that. It's really, really important words that you said. Yeah, thank you. I've been involved with ATD for a very long time. And I'm just going to start off very briefly because of time with some comments about the process of working together for the study groups. And then Amanda and I will talk about the sort of closed adoption system here in the UK, and particularly letterbox contact. Yeah, so the three big projects I've been involved with in ATD over the last 2 decades. The first one was called Getting the Right Trainers, and it was about involvement in social work education. And then we've gone on from that and built on that, and yeah, that one was Mo Roberts was centrally involved in that. So I just want to pay tribute to Mo Roberts, and she, as Diana said, was credited by Ruth Lister for coming up with the terms povertyism, and I was at those workshops where she came up with that term many years ago. So I think what's really important to note about the ATD way of working, participatory way of working, is the sort of merging of knowledge, the bringing together of different perspectives. Certainly all of the different projects have involved social workers, academics, other professionals, but importantly, activists, people with lived experience of poverty. And I think crucially, the work of ATD is really important in supporting and preparing the activists to participate in the workshops, because it's quite easy for me to participate in workshops. This is my job. I talk in front of people. I've been paid to do that for centuries. But, you know, for people who aren't used to speaking in groups, who aren't used to speaking on webinars, that's really important. And I think the whole process of getting together as a group, certainly I've been to a couple of events in the last few years with Frimhurst, one with Uval, I remember, in the middle of just in one of the gaps in the pandemic, but is to prepare to get group to I suppose decide some of the subjects that we're going to talk about, and with the activists, and then in groups with the activists, think about what wants to be said, what needs to be said, and having sort of shared themes that come forward. So, and I just think any participatory work, it's so important to think about those power relationships and really preparing and supporting people to have a voice and to have an equal voice and confidence to speak. So that's just my comments about the process, which I think are really crucial. And one of the key issues raised in the recent ATD work has been, and the contribution to the UN was about contested closed adoptions in the UK. By that I mean adoptions that are made without parents' consent. So they're non-consensual adoptions where a court removes parents' consent, and closed adoptions that there's no direct contact, there's no direct meetings between the children and their birth parents. It's indirect through letterbox, and we'll hear a bit more from Amanda about how that doesn't really work. But just to say that in terms of the consent or non-consent, there was an article in 2002 that referred to a study in 2014 that suggests that almost half of the 5,050 children adopted in the previous year were done without consent. Actually, I think that figure's wrong. I think they've interpreted it wrong. I've looked at that. It's basically, these are the adoptions that are not contested. So the numbers of parents that actually say yes and consent to their children being adopted is tiny. It's really small. It's much less than the 50% that's suggested in the 2014 study. It's how they interpreted that data. By the time you get to the final adoption, a lot of parents, don't have the funds and don't get legal aid to contest adoptions. Also it's more or less a fait accompli. So it's a very emotionally difficult process. So actually, I think we've got the majority, by far the majority of adoptions in the UK. We don't have good statistics, but by far the majority are without parental consent, even if they don't formally go and test the final adoption order. So I'm just so, I mean, these statistics, I think, are very indicative of a child protection system failing to promote and protect the family as a unit. Part of certainly from the European Convention, that's Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. As we said, the majority of adoptions in the UK are closed adoptions. So Amanda, you helped to gather evidence from parents whose children are removed into adoption. Can you tell us something about their experiences, please?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, if a judge removes your children into adoption, the only contact you're allowed is to have what they call a letterbox contact once or maybe twice a year, if you're very lucky. You're only allowed to send, and it has to go straight to the social work departments where they censor your letter. They take out, read, and if there's anything in there that's not deemed appropriate, then it doesn't get forwarded. It gets sent back to you and you get a written or a verbal warning. But if you are lucky and it gets sent on to them, then you hope that the adoptive parents are actually going to actually give the letter and picture to your child, but which in a lot of cases, that doesn't even happen. So by rights, the adoptive parents are breaking the law because it shouldn't be one rule for one and one for another. The date of the letterbox exchange are decided by the court, so you have no choice of writing to mark your child's birthday or getting a letter for Mother's Day. Now I'm going to read quotes from several birth parents about letterbox contact. The social workers shredded the card I sent. I was heartbroken. The adopters said I can send cards and even pictures. So I was sending love cards for the first year, but then later the social workers rung and said, we can't pass these cards and pictures on because the adopters have refused it. So we'll just have to put the cards through the shredder. But they'd said I could send cards. They probably don't even get my letters. In some cases, at the end of the judgment, you get told what you can and cannot put in it. Like you cannot say mummy or daddy. You have to put your proper name. There's no support where people to help write their letters in a manner that can come across well. The first day I wrote, I was told, don't put love from. So I find other ways to tell them that I love them. I don't say it in a way that directs it to them, like I love you, but I put little kisses. But even though they say don't put love from mum, I'm not ever gonna end the letter with my name because I am the mum. So I just put lots of love, me. I know several children that turned 18, but never even got letters. Several people have got reprimanded because they put X or Y or Z in this letter. Things they were told that they were allowed to put, but later somebody else higher up decided no. I wish the doctors would stick to the agreed dates. If ever I wasn't constant about sending the letter on the agreed date, they'd stop all contact. But the adopters always so late when I'm waiting and waiting to hear of how my children are doing. The social worker says one child still remembers me and the other doesn't. And they obviously don't talk about me. That's putting a burden on my girls. One of them has more memories. So is she going to be the one who shares things with her sister someday? Or will she maybe regret if she doesn't? It shouldn't have to be one sister who has that responsibility for the other one. Just because she's older and remembers more by age 14, that child is going to start wondering about their birth parents. So, of my friends are starting to look for their family, but they are so closely watched. They get their school friends to help them to go to a library to try and find out the name of their birth parents and try and track them down themselves. They want information about their own lives. As you can see from all these quotes, the letterbox system really does not work for any of the parents we've talked to. And so forced adoptions are very harsh because relationships are very broken and damaged between the children and their entire extended birth family. That's the quote. So Anna, you've done research on adoption, that children often struggle because of issues related to their identity. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please? You're on mute.
You're muted, Anna.
Yeah, just very quickly, everything that you've said, Amanda, was supported in the research I did with Breach Featherston in 2018, the adoption inquiry. And really, it was practitioners, social work practitioners, as well as parents and birth parents and adopted parents and young people who all said the letterbox system is not working. And it's, I mean, certainly one of the recommendations was that we really needed to relook at contact within adoption here in the UK. But just, I want to finish off just with a quote. I did a workshop with young people who were adopted, and one of them said to me that she'd got these letters from her birth mother that had had sections redacted that were coloured in. And I said to her, what do you think that they said, and she said, oh, I know that it was my mother saying that she loved me. And I said, well, how would you have felt if that wasn't redacted? She said, I would have much preferred that. Children need as many people that love them in their lives. And I thought that was such a sensible thing. It's totally ridiculous that parents cannot say they love their children for the children's sake. So I think we need to stop there.
I think you've both found a very powerful note to end on, because it's inhuman. And what we've been talking about is violations of human rights. And the whole point of giving this evidence to the UN is that we really hope the United Nations will tell the UK government human rights are being violated by all the things you've been hearing about today, from young people, teenagers, from parents, from social work academics. We had hoped that we would leave time for dialogues, which we did not, because we had such amazing speakers. I put our email in the chat, and people are really welcome to dialogue with us, and we are definitely going to share the recording of the webinar. We're grateful to all the speakers. We're grateful to everybody who came. We're grateful to 4 and 10 for inviting us. Emily, would you like to say anything at the end?
Yeah, just wanted to echo what you've already said, Diana. Thank you so much to all of the speakers. What you've shared is exactly what we need to be hearing. And I think hearing how you've listened and reflected on your own experiences, shared it with one another, and then funneled that into an audience, which is the UN. It's taking the contributions that you have and taking it to another group and saying the UK needs to do better. We need to change, and we've got reasons and we've got ideas. I think is really powerful and a great example of collaborative working. So thank you very much for sharing. And I guess with that we'll end it, and I'll share the recording today or tomorrow. And yeah, wish you all a good afternoon.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.